Hello, welcome to the color lecture, for the color photography lecture for ART142, the Intro to Digital Photography class here at Phoenix College. Now we're just going to briefly talk about color theory in relation to photography real quick. Now we're not going to get super in depth because there is a whole color class that's offered here at Phoenix College, and I highly recommend you take it. We have some excellent faculty that teaches it, and the work that comes out of it is absolutely beautiful. So we're just going to briefly touch on this because you should take that class, and it is amazing. So what is color? There's a lot of information about what color is, but Newton began a series of experiments of sunlight and prisms and kind of figured out that there was a visible band of color between the Y rays, the X rays that we get when we go to the doctor, the UV rays that were harmful to the sun, and then the infrared and microwaves and then radio waves and whatnot. So there's a band there of what is visible color, and this is what we see and what we know as Roy G. Biv: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and then violet. This visible spectrum is a really narrow band in the electromagnetic spectrum that can be seen by the human eye. And the cells in our eyes have cones that are sensitive to the wavelengths found in the visible spectrum, and they allow us to see the full colors of the rainbow. So someone who is colorblind, their cones are different. So if you're colorblind, this may be different, but you can still be a photographer. So early color photography started off as sort of RGB with James Clerk Maxwell, and he took 3 lantern slides of tartan ribbon through red, green, and blue filters. So he had film, and he run it through these 3 filters, red, green, and blue, which is why we use RGB color. And you may also see CMYK, which we'll talk about in a second. So he used these and he layered them on top to create a color photograph. Now we hadn't seen this before. This was very simple principles of color photography. But the emulsions that he used were really sensitive to red light, so it's very unfortunate that Maxwell, which kind of did not work for his images. And again, if you want to learn more about this, there's some great videos below that you have to watch. So as we can see, when we separate a color photograph into red, green, and blue filters layered on top, it creates a color photograph. And this is sort of how traditional color printing began, as we sort of took a red channel, layered it with a green channel and a blue channel. And this is how a lot of color film started. You can get really interested about color film. They would take big cameras, and they would shoot the same scene on green film, blue film, and red film, and then sandwich them together to create a color image. Now we don't have to worry about that. We have color film that works for us. We have a photo color wheel between warm and cool colors, and this is sort of CMYK and RGB. And this really makes sense if you ever get into a color darkroom, which is very rare. I'm a big fan of color darkroom. It really makes sense to me to understand colors. But when you're color correcting an image, which again we've noticed this, if it's really warm, you adjust that slider in Lightroom to the blue, and if it's really cool, we adjust it to the yellow, and then the tint between magenta and green. And we don't really have to worry about the cyan and red. We just have to worry about these two, and this again makes more sense once you work in a color darkroom. But know that if your picture is too red, you need to add more cyan. If it's too yellow, you need to add some blue. If it's too green, you need to add magenta. And really knowing how to adjust these colors is really important. So when we talk about colors, and again this has been talked about a little bit in your Lightroom and demos before, but we have hue, value, saturation, and luminance. So hue kind of is sort of like what color is. So red is a hue, orange is a hue. It's really just the term for color. Again, we also use hue as sort of warm and cool colors, which is red, orange, yellow for warm, and then cool being green, blue, and violet. And blue, when we talk about the hue, it's really just the color. So if you're adjusting the hue saturation, it's the color of it, the overall color. Now the value is the relative lightness or darkness of the color. So if you are in another class or even in the ART142, which I also teach, we talk about value, which is sort of a gradient between dark to light. Typically we talk about this in sort of a black to white spectrum, but this also can be applied to color. Saturation is the purity of this color. A fully saturated image contains no white, no black, no gray. It is full color, it's full hue, and sometimes it's called chromatic. When we add white to a hue, it creates a lighter value known as a tint, black, shade, and gray tone. But really what we're thinking about saturation is how pure the color is. So when we take that saturation light slider up to the right for full, you're really just adding the purity of that color. When you take it to the left, we're actually removing the purity of the color. Luminance is the absolute measurement of light. So it's the intensity of light that hits the eye reflecting off the object. There's a lot of really in-depth information of how luminance is when we think about physics, which I'm not a big expert in. But luminance is really affected by a couple different methods. So luminance could be how you're viewing your screen, in what type of environment. Is it a dark room? Is it a light room? And also sort of the luminance of the light reflecting on a print that you get. So luminance is within the screen, but it's also within your image as well. There's brightness, which we'll talk about within luminance, darkness as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about different color schemes that you may use in your photography. Because knowing how to use color is really important. Color is how light is reflecting off surfaces, so it's what we see. Monochromatic images are really important. When you use this term, you think of black and white images, but it's also sort of anything that's solely one color value or one hue overall. So those images we see that are overwhelming one color monochrome, so this is overwhelming cool. Blue, there may be some tints other, but there's a lot of blue tones in here. This isn't really artificial. It's sort of this light reflecting within the water and in the sky, reflecting here. Images that are monochromatic really sort of have this balance and this unity within the images. You seem balanced, they're uniform, everything's the same color. Again, if we take the 2D design elements, 2D design, computer design course that I teach, ART142, we talk about unity and form and gestalt theory and how we group things. And you may use monochromatic colors to really group things together. And again, really sort of understanding the power that color has, and think about what colors mean and what influence and feeling you can have. Now there's some coolness there, but this is overwhelming a red image based off this artificial light. It really sets the tone for the images as well. Larry Sultan has great color palette within his work. I definitely recommend you check it out. Analogous colors are colors that sit next to each other on the color wheel. So sometimes there's sort of color chords, and they have sort of, usually we'll use one dominant color and the others kind of fade in the back. But it's sort of different things in the color chords. So you look at our color wheel, we're looking at our traditional color wheel, not a photography one with the CMYK RGB. So we have blue, yellow, and green next to each other, and thinking about sort of this harmony that this photographs can take. Green is really popular with monochromatic green, yellow, blue. But sort of how one can really pull out, but again, feel comfortable with all the other images and photographs that are represented. And everything seems to complement them. And that takes us to complementary, which are colors that are opposite. These are really bold. This is stark contrast. Again, there's this balance but contrast. It's kind of this push-pull when using complementary colors in your photography. It can be warm and cool as well. Something about this strong neutral and the little peaks, little hints of complementary colors is really strong. Think about what is neutral and what are the kind of strong colors leading. And think about the other sort of contrast you can use in your photography, this sort of warm light against this cool evening sky, and that contrast as well. This exterior looking in, warm and cool. It really pulls things out with that visual contrast. It draws you in. Typically with complementary, you have one color leading it and then the other kind of peeking in. Triadic color schemes, which are a little more difficult, is sort of hues that are equally spaced around the color wheel. So they have an energetic but balanced effect. So if you look at your color wheel, instead of colors that are opposite or analogous, it's sort of they create a triangle within the color wheel. So you would have red, yellow, and blue, which would be primary colors. Or you can have the complementary colors of orange, green, and violet. But sort of this like energetic balance, again, the primary colors are very strong. Really pull out. These are kind of harder to find if you're looking for them. They're really great sort of color chords. Again, balance, but this energy and how everything works together. And sometimes what I really like to do is emphasize a single color. So you let one color kind of sing again this field of neutrals. You know, we're all that energy, but again, it is usually the brightest part of a composition or the brightest part of an image draws you in. But that color, that single color, it's singing, it's telling me the story. It pulls me again and everything else that's neutral. And it's so much about that bit that's really bright and vibrant. Again, this isn't taking a black and white image or an image with mostly black and white and then taking one color part that's in color. That's too easy. I don't want to see that. I want to see where the color is really singing against the rest of it. Let the color lead us, not Photoshop tricks. Again, you may kind of mute it out with some saturation adjustment layers and masking, but you want it to be subtle. You want it to appear as natural to the human eye as possible. That one color tells the story amongst everything else that is in that field of neutral. What does that color mean? What does it make you feel? So there's going to be some readings, and then there's also going to be another few other videos to watch, and you'll respond to a discussion question when you think about color, and definitely pull color within your next project. Or think about it as you walk around.